Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thank you for finding us. I hope this video finds you well. Welcome to the Bang Bus. Lighting is terrible in here because I'm in a parking garage, but this is where I parked at work today. I'm in the car. I got to record. And so we're making a video in the Bang Bus, in the parking garage. Today we are talking about Fatal Termination. Hell yes. Girls with Guns / heroic bloodshed. I mean, I would describe this more as a heroic bloodshed movie. Moon Lee is not really the main character in this movie, even though a lot of the marketing makes it seem as though she is. It's an ensemble piece, and she's really the only central female character in the film. So I would describe it more as like a heroic bloodshed style thriller than I would describe it as a Girls with Guns movie, but I mean, that's kind of like splitting hairs. So I want to give a shout out to our patrons because this release was purchased with Patreon money. This is the Error 4444 release. This is the first release that I have from this company, and I really like it. I mean, it's a high quality release in terms of like the physical, it's a really nice slipcase. The packaging is really nice. There's a lot of bells and whistles in here, which I'll go into in just a second. And I think they put a lot of effort clearly into the release in the film here, and I will talk about in a second. There's been like some controversy on Twitter and social media about the quality of the print that they used for the remastering here, so I'll talk about that in a second, but let me get the details out of the way first. So Fatal Termination was directed by Andrew Kam, who was one of the directors on The Big Heat. It's a famous story of that movie having two and then possibly maybe a third shadow director on it. So, but the credited directors are Andrew Kam and then Johnny To, actually. And then he also directed Swordsman, 9 films in total. The cast is Moon Lee, like I said, Simon Yam. I love Simon Yam. I thought he was fantastic in this movie. I was thinking while I was watching this movie, because this is very much like a B movie, right? And to see Simon Yam in it as like he's this incredible actor, to see, you know, he elevates his character and he elevates the material in general whenever he's in a film like this. I often associate Simon Yam with Anthony Wong. I think probably because they're in similar types of movies, but then they're also in certain movies together. Like they're both in Full Contact and they're both in Exiled. I think that the way that a lot of people look at Anthony Wong is how I perceive Simon Yam. I prefer Simon Yam, not to compare apples to oranges, but if I had to pick Simon Yam or Anthony Wong as an actor, I would pick Simon Yam. They have this kind of like Nicolas Cage quality of like being really phenomenal actors who are in a lot of movies you might consider to be like trashy movies or B movies or whatever, low budget films. And then they can do really incredible prestige projects and get like nominated for awards and be like, you know, on par with the greatest actors in the world. And so that's kind of like Simon Yam is like my dude for those types of movies. I love Simon Yam. Robin Shou is in this movie, Philip Ko, Ridley Choi, Ray Lui, Michael Mew. So it's a really, really fantastic cast in this movie. And it really is an ensemble film. As I said, we were getting maybe some audio issues with the very loud truck driving by. Let me wait for a second. It's really not like a single protagonist film. I'll talk more about that in a second, but there is a great cast in this movie. It ran in theaters in Hong Kong. I think did I say this already? March 3rd, 1990 to March 8th of 1990. 2.5 million Hong Kong dollars was the box office. And I'll show off the physical release for you here. I'll tell you a little bit about the story, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the film. So it's a double-sided slipcase. So there's one side, and there's the other side. And this release came with, I think there were like 3 versions of the release. There were 2 slipcases, and then there was like an ultra mega deluxe version. So that's the artwork on the inside there. And then there's the back cover, but it is reversible. So when we open it up, we have the disc. There's stickers. This came with stickers, which is pretty awesome. So this is what you see when you open the release. And then there's 3 stickers. So there's this. And this scene is very, very, very infamous, I think, for a stunt in the film in which a child is held by their hair out of a car window, and the car drives off down the street at high speeds. I mean, the scene is very, very obviously undercranked, right? Which means that, like, they weren't actually going the speed at which it seems they're going. But there's more information in this release about that stunt that I think is very interesting. So there's that, and then the reversible artwork is the other half of the slipcase, so you can choose whichever of those you like. And then I actually really, really liked the essays in here, especially the first one. So here's the booklet. The first essay is called Moonlee, the Mother with Guns by Jessica Young. And she talks about, Jessica Young in this essay talks about like Moonlee's career, the Girls with Guns genre, defining what the subgenre is and who the big stars were, and talks about Michelle Yeoh and this film in the context of, what Michelle Yeoh's career was and what it has become now, and women in action films in general in that era. And what I really liked about this essay is that it's obviously well-researched, well thought out, very intelligent, but it's not like inscrutable academic nonsense, right? It's not just like this deluge of jargon where you're like, does this person actually have anything to say? Like it's very easy to read, and it's got a lot of great information in it, but it's obviously very intelligent and well researched. So it finds like a really good middle ground. And then the other one is called Caution to the Wind, an overview of Fatal Termination, and this is by Michelle Kisner, who I think is a film critic. Oh, and I should also say that Jessica Young is a research assistant professor in literary and film studies at Lingman University. And then Michelle Kisner, I believe, is a film critic. Now, I will say there is one thing about this piece that I disagree with, which is right here in the first sentence. Fatal Termination is an interesting stew, a mix of standard police procedural and some of the most insane action and stunt work imaginable. I take exception to the idea of it being a standard police procedural, but I will talk about that in just a second. Because there are things about this film that I thought were pretty atypical that actually really impressed me. Now, it is worth noting that a lot of people have pointed out that if you look at the artwork on this release, if you look at the trailer, if you know the kind of social media, cultural, whatever you want to call it, dialogue around this film's release, a lot of it has been focused on how this is like a batshit insane action film, right? And on the cover, you've got, Moonlee with the machine gun, and there's like something blowing up, and there's people kicking each other, and then you've got all kinds of shooting and fighting on this version of the cover on the slipcase here. And while this movie does have a handful of really good shooting scenes and like a crazy finale and some really great stunts and action, it's not primarily an action film. It is a character and story-driven film. Here's where I'm going to get into my thoughts. Let me tell you the plot, basically, in a nutshell. There's a group of, I don't know if you want to call them terrorists, a militia, an organization from the Middle East that is trying to get weapons to the Philippines. So, like, they're going through, like, an arms dealer, basically. And those weapons have to come through Hong Kong. So, Philip Ko plays... Well, let me back up a little bit here. Robin Shou plays the customs guy, right? So there's like bribes going through customs, and their rival group, rival militia, rival freedom fighting group, whatever you want to call it, right? So you have these two groups. One of them is trying to get the weapons into the Philippines. The other group knows that the weapons are coming and wants to intercept them and take them for themselves, right? So they're both trying to bribe people and get these weapons, with customs being like the Hong Kong customs agency being like the central kind of hub of these weapons. The Simon Yam character plays a cop whose department has gotten wind of the fact that they are trying to bring these weapons in. And so you have Robin Shou as the customs official who is willing to take bribes. Simon Yam as the cop who will not be bribed, who wants to make arrests. So they're at odds with each other. And then these two different militia groups at odds with one another, both trying to go through the customs official who is at odds with both of them. So you end up having like 4 factions of characters. And within these factions, I would say you have like 5 or 6 characters that could be considered genuinely central lead characters, and then like 4 or 5 others who are very important supporting characters. So you have like 8 to 10 characters in this film who are all affecting the plot. And that's very atypical for a film of this nature. It's a really interesting narrative structure. It almost reminds me of like an Elmore Leonard novel. I'm just thinking of Elmore Leonard because I recently saw the 25th anniversary screening of Out of Sight, which is like one of my favorite movies ever. But in a really good crime novel, especially like an Elmore Leonard style crime novel, you don't get like a single protagonist and a single bad guy. You get like all these groups of characters, and they all have their own motivations and are all kind of pushing the plot in different ways. And it creates a lot of drama and a lot of tension. The setup of this film is excellent. The first, like, I would say like 6 to 10 minutes or so, sets up all these factions of characters so that as soon as we get into like the first kind of sequence of action, there's incredible amounts of tension and there's a lot of questions in your head as an audience member because you're like, what's going to go on here? Who am I going to root for? Like, where's the story going to go? Who's going to betray who? It's really well set up. It's also worth mentioning that there's all these complicated relationships between the characters. So Robin Shou plays the guy who's the head of customs, like I said. The airport security, customs cops, whatever you want to call it, Moon Lee, and the guy who plays her husband, who is the Ray Loy character, the two of them are like, they kind of work like under him, has like airport security, customs, police kind of things. And then the Moon Lee character's brother is a customs officer who works under this guy. So the three of them are all related to each other. And one of the things that I think this movie does incredibly well, that again, this is something you especially don't see in like B movies, exploitation movies, or even sometimes like very, very plot point driven Hollywood films. The emotional and mental pressure of the events of the film put a lot of stress on the characters that affect the way they behave and the decisions they make. And so that becomes a factor that affects the plot. So there's one particular scene I thought was so well done, where the Moon Lee character's brother has been kind of like, I mean, this is like a tiny spoiler, not really, like a little bit of a spoiler. The Moon Lee character's brother is framed for something. And so Moon Lee obviously is very upset and stressed about this, like what's going to happen to her brother and is he going to go to jail, his career, like, and then her, you know, her husband, who is also like a law officer, is, you know, he has obviously allegiance to his wife. He has allegiance to his brother-in-law, but he's also got this part of him who's an officer. And he's like, well, he is like the primary suspect and they seem to have evidence against him. And like, maybe he did actually do, like, we don't know what actually happened. And so like, within the family, you start to see the stress and the pressure, the strain of the events affecting the characters. And that then in turn affects the decision-making of them going forward through the story. It's a really, really fantastic scene. And you get a lot of stuff like that. Like you have flawed characters under a lot of pressure who don't always make great decisions, but are trying to do the right thing. And that creates a lot of drama and a lot of tension for the audience. I really think that one of the things that's exemplary about this film to me that really, really stood out to me is that they very clearly were thinking about the audience experience in every scene to create as much engagement as possible through surprises, betrayals, unexpected decisions, violence, tension. Like every scene has something happening in it. There's no wasted space at all. It's a very economical narrative. There's a really incredible scene in this movie where there's a car chase, and during the car chase, I can't think off the top of my head of an other movie where I've seen this before. I thought this was a really bold narrative decision. During the car chase, there is a flashback that shows a previous relationship between two characters we before that scene had no idea had known each other before. And so you get the excitement of the car chase and the violence of it and the tension of it. And then you cut into this flashback and you realize the history between these characters. So when you cut back to the car chase, there's so much more context for it. You understand the stakes better. You understand the anger and the violence of the scene differently. And it's so well done. And it's a very quick flashback, but it twists what you're seeing so that your perspective changes in the moment. And this movie just is constantly engaging. Now, I do have to point out that, as I said, a lot of people have talked about how this is not a non-stop action film. I love thrillers, especially character and story-driven films that are about people in like tense, violent situations making decisions and how those decisions affected their lives and the circumstances around them. I love those types of films. Like outside of like the Jackie Samo type of movie, that type of movie, like the heroic bloodshed kind of thriller movie, John Woo, Ringo Lam, like those types of films, the Tiger Cage series, those are like my favorite types of Hong Kong films. So this falls directly in line with my love of these movies, right? So you do have to understand that there is the, the caveat of this review is that this falls perfectly in line with my personal taste. I love these types of movies. And so I responded really positively to this film, and I was really pleasantly surprised by how much I liked it. Because based on what I had been seeing online, I kind of expected it to be like a routine Girls with Guns heroic bloodshed type of film with like a couple, major stunts or set pieces that were kind of impressive. Interestingly enough, a lot of people have been talking about how like when this movie finally kicks into really high gear with the violence in like the last 20 minutes or so, that was when they really got engaged. I actually found the climactic fight sequence in this film to be the least engaging part. The reason being, and let me explain it to you, it's not that it's not a great fight and chase sequence, which it is. It's like great cinematic spectacle and violence. At that point, the story is over. And the only thing that's really left is for the violence to play itself out. And so there's no tension anymore. There's no story left to go. It's just like, we're pretty sure we know who's going to die, and we just have to wait and see how they die. And so that to me is like, there's less of an active engagement on my part when that kind of stuff is happening. But it is great action spectacle. I just thought of something else I wanted to say. This movie pulls fucking no punches. Like, this is definitely a Hong Kong movie in terms of like, we're going to kill as many characters as we feel like killing, and we're not beholden to any kind of moral code or like it goes there. And it goes there. You know what I mean? Like, it's very Hong Kong. Incredible music in this movie. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything that there's just like, to my point of like how attentive this film is to the audience's engagement in it. There's this really incredible action scene that takes place on a rooftop. And that Philip Ko, as the bad guy, has he's kidnapped some characters, and some other characters come to rescue them. And like within the scene, there's a really tense situation when you first get into the scene that's really like nerve-wracking and like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Who's going to die? Like, and then other characters show up by surprise, situations change, but then situations change again. And it's like this scene on the rooftop is like a mini movie unto itself. There are so many reversals and so much escalating tension and so much unexpected violence and so many unexpected twists within the film that it's really kind of astonishing. It's an astonishing scene. And, that could have been pulled out of this movie and been like a short film in and of itself. It's so well done. And it has its own arc, its own beats, its own story. Like, it's so, so well done. Like, it tells a story from beginning to end within the sequence, or the scene rather, but that scene ties into the larger thrust of the film. So it's really, really good, solid filmmaking. And I love that scene. So let's talk about the bonus material on here. There are two cuts of the film. The Hong Kong cut, which has, I think there's 4 audio options on the Hong Kong cut. I kind of went through them a little bit, and they, it seems like they're mixed differently. That seems to be like the main sound effects and volume and stuff, or dialogue at different volume levels. I thought this movie sounded freaking fantastic. Okay, so let me get into the look of it, because some people have complained that the print is not in good condition, and that even though I think they did a really fantastic job with the materials that they had, because I thought most of this film looked really, really good. Some people have complained about it being shaky. There's only one section of this film where I noticed shaking, and it was noticeably distracting, and it was like 5 seconds long, and it's like a shot of a guy sitting on a couch or something. Like it's this very innocuous shot of that like is not really essential to the film. Other than that, I watched this on a big 59-inch TV. Like, it was not noticeable to me. The thing that is noticeable to me is that in some scenes, and I don't know enough to know why this is, it's very dark. I don't know if that's because they shot these scenes like in a warehouse and they didn't set up enough lighting, so the film stock itself did not preserve enough light, enough visual information for us to be able to see stuff. But the shadows are so deep and dark that you can't see like people's faces at times. That's just one scene where I noticed that. But in general, I noticed there are some very deep shadows in this movie, and I don't know that's because they didn't have a lot of resources making the film, so the lighting was not good, or because the print they were working with just didn't, they weren't working with a negative. Maybe they just scanned a print. I don't know. but you do notice in a couple scenes it's kind of dark. What this made me think of was going to a place like the New Beverly is one of my local, like, you know, repertory kind of grindhouse style theaters, like going to the New Beverly, the Arrow, the, you know, American Cinematheque, like one of those types of theaters, and seeing like an old 35mm print, but one that's really well preserved. Like I didn't notice a ton of scratches on this. There were some, but like it wasn't heinous. And the audio, like I said, is really crisp and clear. I thought the audio was fantastic. So it's like seeing like a really well-preserved like old print in a theater. I thought it was a really cool experience because I really like going and having that experience. So there's an alternate cut on here that's a 7 minutes shorter, that's an English dub. So it's like an alternate version of the film in full. There's a Mike Abbott interview. He is in this film. Let me see if he's on the artwork and I can show you. Yeah, here he is. He's this guy here. So he's English. He's from Cornwall in England. And his interview it's 8 minutes long. Like I said, it's really interesting. He talks about how, like, you know, he was from Cornwall and then he traveled to Germany, I think, at some point, and he was kind of just like traveling all around. He went to Chicago. He met a guy in Chicago who was like, I'm going to Hong Kong, and he was like, hey, that sounds like fun. He ended up going to Hong Kong. He's been living there ever since. He legitimately says in the movie he doesn't know how he first got into movies. Like, he can't remember. He's like, I think someone, like, he mentions Godfrey Ho. He's like, I think someone like Godfrey Ho found me and asked me to be in a movie, and I did an okay job, so they asked me to do another one, and I just did movies for a while. It's like, it's a really interesting interview, and you get some interesting insight into his career. And then the Ridley Choi interview on here, he's in the film, but he was also the fight choreographer of the film, and he did all of the stunts in the movie, which is amazing. There's some really, really fantastic stunts. Like, there's multiple scenes where someone falls off the roof of a building. There's at least two, and then there's another, like, really big fall into, like, a fountain or, like, a swimming pool type of thing. And so he did all of that stuff. And, you know, he worked with Sammo. I mean, the interview is fantastic. He talks about, like, his dad did Peking Opera, so he wanted him to do it, too. So he went to Peking Opera School, and it was the same school that Jackie and Sammo went to. When he got out of school, Jackie and Sammo were like at the height of their careers in the 80s, so he got hired by Sammo, and he did like lots of stunts with them and lots of fights, and he talks about taking all these different martial arts classes to improve himself and like doing fight directing films. There's really cool behind-the-scenes footage from films he worked on and behind-the-scenes photographs throughout the interview. He talks a lot about Paul Wong, who was like an unsung hero of that era in Hong Kong cinema, who was on the Jackie Chan like fight team, stunt team, who was like a, you know, quintessential member of like a lot of like the best films made from that era. And they talk a lot about him on the commentary track too. There's a podcast on Fire commentary with Kenneth Borison and Phil Gillen. I'll talk more about that in just a sec, but they talk quite a bit about Paul Wong's life, and I thought that is really, really cool, like his life and career, and a lot of great information there. And so here, okay, so the stunt that this movie is famous for, right? If I'm understanding Ridley Choi's interview correctly, there was like a harness involved, and there was like a kind of like a crane metal arm type of apparatus. Like, there wasn't really any danger of the child being hurt. The way that people talk about this stunt, it seems as though Mike Abbott just grabbed her by this little girl by the hair and held her out the window of a car, and they drove at like 50 miles an hour. Ridley Choi talks about how they like did a lot of work to put the parents at ease, so the parents of the girl weren't worried about that she was going to get hurt, and they created a rig with like a harness, and they tested it on like an adult to make sure it wouldn't break on an adult, so they knew it would be fine for a kid. And they did like several tests of it, and they like undercranked the film and weren't driving that fast. It sounds like pretty safe and controlled in the context of Hong Kong cinema in 1990, right? But it doesn't seem like it was as dangerous as people make it out to be. There's also the possibility that Ridley Choi is like trying to correct the record a little bit, so it doesn't seem like he was involved in child endangerment. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like the child was really in danger, but what do I know? Korean VHS credits are on here, which is cool. They took the credit sequence off of a Korean VHS tape, and you can watch that. There's a Mandarin dub ending credit song. And then the commentary track. So, like I said, I mean, they do so much research. I think I said before at some point about the Kenneth Borison and Phil Gillen commentary tracks that it's like watching the movie with friends of yours and having a beer, but those friends of yours happen to know like literally everything about the movie, and while you're watching it, they're like, oh, this person was in these 5,000 other things. And like, there's so much research done. They know so much about every single person involved in this movie, and you hear all about their careers and their stories, and it's so fascinating. I learned a lot about different people involved in the making of this film. I learned a lot in particular about The Big Heat. So as I mentioned earlier, Andrew Kam was the co-director of The Big Heat, and they have dug up interviews with like Johnny To and talking about, because there's some controversy about Andrew Kam, Johnny To are credited as the directors of The Big Heat. Troy Hark produced the movie, and some people say he actually directed it. And apparently Johnny To gave an interview at some point where he talked about what actually happened on the set of that movie. I've never seen or heard that interview before. They talk about that interview and what the set of that film was really like, and that was really, really cool for me. Is I love that movie. That's like a top 11 heroic bloodshed movie for me. I say 11 because I did my list recently in my top 10, and I put that as an honorable mention. It was between that and Black Vengeance for me at number 10, and I ended up going with Black Vengeance because I'm such a huge Chow Yun-fat fan, but The Big Heat is an incredible movie, so it was really cool to learn about that, and just like you learn so much about the different people involved in the film, and they're also very funny. You get like some really good banter and like funny observations about like why is Simon Yam drinking coffee out of like a mason jar, like silly stuff like that. So it's Fatal Termination, Error 4444 release. I highly recommend this. I thought this movie was much better than I thought it was going to be. I really enjoyed it. It's a really good release that I think a lot of effort went into. You know, the print is not the best print that has ever existed, but I don't think that really matters. I think they did a really good job with the materials that they had to them. It's like watching a really fun grindhousey movie in like your favorite, you know, second run 35 millimeter, you know, rigged theater. I recommend it if you can get your hands on it, if you're interested in checking it out. My name is Will. You are watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Shout out to our patrons. This is a Patreon. I bought this with Patreon money. So this video would not exist were it not for our patrons. This is going to be a Patreon early release video. So they'll get it probably a week or two before it goes up on YouTube. But I thank you so much for watching. I hope you like the Bang Bus, and we'll see you next time.